All right, the question on the table that is being brought up here is, which is better, Star Wars or Star Trek? Well, I wanted to say, well, obviously Star Wars. I wanted to say Star Wars is clearly cooler than Star Trek. That's why Star Trek is for nerds and Star Wars is for everyone. But I realized that that statement was coming from a place deep inside myself. An old place, a primal place that was forged and nurtured a long time ago. A long time. Way, way back in the 1980s and 90s. A time when Star Wars was 3 films. 3 films with no computer-generated imagery in them, no silly musical numbers in Jabba the Hutt's throne room, no question over whether Han or Greedo shot first. Just 3 simple films that looked really good, and we loved them. We called them the Holy Trilogy. And they were holy to us, practically. Like they were almost sacred. They were important. They held a place of honor on our VHS collection shelf, okay? Usually in a little cardboard thing that held all 3 tapes. And you could never decide whether to have it faced out so that like the 3 tapes were visible, so you could see like New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, or if you should flip it around the other way and just get like the big graphic there, or maybe turn it sideways, depending on what version you had. Maybe it had a cool like Darth Vader helmet on it or something. But anyway, point is, we loved those movies, and there was only 3 of them, and it was the Holy Trilogy, and it was awesome. And in that same time period, Star Trek was Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation, which was still going. And those of us that were Star Wars fans, we knew that we were cooler than the Star Trek fans, okay? Because it was like, what? We just happen to like these movies, these 3 movies. They're good ones. We like them. It's nothing nerdy about that. There's not a word for Star Wars fans. We're just Star Wars fans. There was a word for Star Trek fans. We called them Trekkies, and it was pejorative. I had never heard of any kind of Star Wars convention back in those days, but I definitely knew about Star Trek conventions being a thing. We knew that the Trekkies were a bunch of nerds that had their pants hiked up to their armpits and glasses with a little tape in the middle, and they put on their little Star Trek uniforms, their little Starfleet, whatever, and they went in, and their little Spock ears, and they went to their conventions and walked around going, live long and prosper. And we were just like, we're not like that. We're not like those guys. We're cool. I mean, okay, we're kind of nerdy, but we're not that nerdy. Jeez. I remember specifically having this conversation with a friend of mine, be like, yeah, you don't see us acting like that. You know, it's oh my God, those insufferable dorks. Like, we're not going around dressing up like Star Wars characters or learning to speak the language that Jabba the Hutt speaks. You know, that's insane. I know it's called Huttese, but I didn't know it back then because the internet wasn't a thing. We didn't know stuff. Okay? The movies never called it Huttese, as far as I know. Anyway, we knew that, like, we weren't like those guys. And we knew Star Wars was cooler. We knew that Star Wars was an epic, timeless tale of good versus evil in a fantasy sci-fi setting that could have been any setting because it was just a timeless tale, and that Star Trek was a bunch of nerds talking about dilithium crystals and antimatter and phasers set to whatever. I gotta reverse the polarity on the googity goggity goo. You know? And that was like, if you're talking about next gen, if you're talking about the original series, it's like, it's just this dumb thing that looks like it's from the 70s. And I mean, Star Wars was from the 70s, but Star Trek looked like it was, you know? It looked so terrible. I mean, the windows on the Enterprise were stickers. But here's the thing. It isn't those days anymore. Now, Star Wars does have CGI in it, and Han and Greedo shoot at about the same time, and there is a silly musical number in Jabba the Hutt's throne room, and Anakin's Force Ghost looks like Hayden Christensen for some reason, even though that would be really weird to appear to Luke in a form that Luke wouldn't recognize, and so on. A million things that are not great about it anymore, and it's not just those 3 movies. It's 3 prequels that have Jar Jar Binks, and midi-chlorians are a thing now, and you know, and there's the sequels, and they just didn't know what they were. They're not bad, but they just couldn't pick a direction. And there's Snoke, and then there's not Snoke, and then there's Palpatine again, and why? I don't know. And there he is, and it's cartoons and comic books and older cartoons and comic books that are legends, and it's just a bunch of stuff, and it's a bunch of toxic fans that are all, yeah, forced diversity. What, they got a black stormtrooper now? You get a lady Jedi, and and this isn't my Luke. Luke is supposed to be a Superman, not a wimpy old guy that drinks green milk from a boob of an alien, which that was really weird. It's just Star Wars. You know how you can tell a Star Wars fan now? You know how you can tell the difference between a Star Wars fan and a regular person? Simple. Star Wars fans friggin' hate Star Wars. It wasn't that way back in the day. Back when it was just the Holy Trilogy, we all loved the Holy Trilogy so much. Every one of it. Most of us liked Empire best, but either way, you just loved it. Now, we're all divided. Some of us hate some of it, some of us hate all of it. There are Star Wars fans that have legit thrown out their merchandise and been like, forget it, I'm done. I don't think that's going on with the Star Trek world. I think the Star Trek fans are a little more cool. I know there are, because of course there are Star Trek people going, Star Trek, how come it got all woke now? But it doesn't seem to me that like that's a big faction. I get the impression that most Star Trek fans understand that Star Trek was always about being progressive and woke, and it was the very first series was like a ship where they're like, hey, let's put a black lady on here and a white guy and you know what, let's throw in a Russian and a Scottish fella and like you know, we'll just put a Japanese dude, we'll just put them all on there. And we won't even discuss their races or ethnic or national backgrounds all that much, because this is in the future and it doesn't matter, because they don't fight over that stuff anymore. They've gone through that and they are now working towards the common good together and not bickering over dumb crap. And they respect each other's culture. They express, you know, yeah, he's got an accent. Yeah, I know. Yeah, this one's Japanese. So what? Maybe he like has different foods and different musics and stuff in his culture, but like we're all cool. And I just, you know what? That's pretty cool. Like I've now seen the original series, and I'm making my way through Next Generation, and I tell you, Next Generation has brought tears to my eyes. Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. I mean, how can you not love that? So, Star Wars will always kind of be my jam. It'll always hold a special place in my heart because of the way I remember it. But I cannot in good conscience reasonably say that in 2022 that Star Wars is in any way that I can think of cooler or better than Star Trek. At least, not anymore.